All right. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Welcome to the March CISMA call, monthly CISMA call. In the interest of kind of honoring the fact that Fisk is an all-tax organization, we have a number of speakers coming up in the next couple of months that work with wildlife. So it was in that vein that I invited Alex to come and speak to us today about updates to FWC's Prohibited Reptiles rules. So Alex Furst is the Rules and Risk Coordinator at FWC's Non-Native Fish and Wildlife Program, and he's here to talk to us about some of the new things that have been happening as far as the rules and regulations governing prohibited reptiles. And I think that's about as much of an intro as I have. I will say that, as usual, we'll go through the presentation. We'll have a Q&A session at the end. I have a few updates, just Fisk Pack general updates after the presentation. So, with that, Alex, if you want to go ahead and screen share, you can take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Christian, for that
Thank you.
introduction here. Can everyone see my screen okay there?
Yes, looks good.
Okay. I'm just moving some screens around here. All right. Still good there? That's
Yep.
cool. Awesome. All right. Well, hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name's Alex Furst. I'm the Rules and Risk Assessment Coordinator for the Non-Native Fish and Wildlife Program with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. I've been in this position for a little over a year now, and I formerly was a biologist too in the program, working on a lot of our non-native wildlife management projects. So, doing a ton of trapping for the Argentine black and white tegu, and doing surveys for Burmese pythons down in Southwest Florida. And then I took a quick pit stop at the University of Florida for graduate school, and now I'm back with the program. So, very excited and honored to be invited to speak to you all today. There we go. Had a little bit of a freeze there. All right. So here's a quick outline of the topics I'll be covering in this presentation. So I'd like to begin the presentation by providing a very brief overview on invasive species in Florida, their introduction pathways and impacts, and how our non-native fish and wildlife program addresses non-native fish and wildlife in Florida. Then I'll provide a quick overview on the initiation for the rulemaking process. Then I'll dive into our 2025 rule changes for prohibited reptiles. So we had two separate rule packages that we worked on in 2025. And while they were separate, they did share similar goals and very much worked off of each other. So our first rule package really focused on collection and sales of green iguanas and some other regulatory changes for non-native species. And those rules went into effect on August 20th of 2025. Then our second rule package included outdoor caging and biosecurity for green iguanas, and that rule package went into effect January 7th of 2026. So I'll provide an overview on both of those rule change packages. Then finally, I'll wrap up my presentation discussing some next steps for stakeholder engagement for the non-native fish and wildlife program. All right, so invasive fish and wildlife in Florida. So Florida is uniquely susceptible to invasive species due to our subtropical climate, multiple ports of entry, and the presence of the live animal trade industry. So the FWC strives to identify risk associated with invasive species and ultimately minimize adverse impacts from them. So I want to touch on two broad categories of introduction pathways. So this includes intentional introductions, such as intentional released pet, and unintentional introductions, such as an accidental escape or an animal hitching a ride on a cargo ship, like the mongoose on this photo here. So this mongoose hitched a ride on a sugar shipment and actually got caught in port. So it was reported to us, and luckily port employees were able to get a trap deployed, and we were able to remove this mongoose. So high priority species such as the mongoose generally creates a situation where it's all hands on deck for our staff to respond and remove the species from the environment before it has a chance to cause negative impacts. So let's dive into some of the impacts of invasive species. So not every non-native species will become invasive, but when they do, it's important to recognize the severity of the impacts that they could have. So there's a lot of them. So I'm just going to dive into some of our heavy hitters here. So you have ecological impacts that affects native wildlife through competition and predation. So the photo on the top left of the Burmese python that consumed a native white-tailed deer is a great example of direct predation. And many of these invasive species eat similar things as our native wildlife and are taking away those valuable resources. They can also cause economic impacts, including damage to seawalls, roadways, crops, and even fisheries as well. So this totals to millions of dollars annually towards repairs and management as well. And the photo on the right shows damage to a seawall and a walkway on a residential property that was caused by green iguanas. And then human health and safety impacts like injury and disease transmission. So diseases and parasite transmission, not just to humans, but to our pets and to our native species as well. So the far bottom left photos are pictures of native Florida snakes with parasites. So non-native snakes, likely the Burmese python, introduced this lung parasite called pennistomes, which is a crustacean and that our native snakes are dying from. Since our 2025 rule change packages focus so heavily on green iguanas, I did want to provide a quick slide on green iguanas in Florida. So they're one of the most prevalent invasive species in South Florida. They were first documented in Florida in the 1960s and have since established and expanded their range, primarily occupying urban and suburban environments, but they've also begun moving into more natural areas as well. So green iguanas cause impacts to Florida's ecology, but they also cause significant damage to important infrastructure, such as our roadways and canal banks as well. Because they pose such a high risk to Florida, green iguanas are regulated as a prohibited species, and our staff work to protect Florida's resources from impacts of this species using a variety of management and control strategies. So with the current tools and technologies, it's not likely that green iguanas will be eradicated from Florida. However, our staff still utilizes these control and management strategies to minimize the adverse impacts of this species on Florida's resources. All right, so in our non-native fish and wildlife program. So our program utilizes a multi-pronged approach when addressing non-native fish and wildlife in Florida and managing the impacts. So I won't be going too in-depth, but I did want to provide a quick highlight for each of these approaches. So we'll start at the top there with early detection and rapid response, or EDRR. So EDRR is a strategy used to respond to high priority non-native species reports, such as large constrictors, tegus, and monitor species, to catch and remove individuals before they have a chance to establish or potentially expand their established range. We utilize a hotline to receive reports across the state of Florida and can respond to reports when necessary by tapping into our responder network of FWC staff, our partners, volunteers, and paid contractors as well. So from 2024 to 2025, we received over 3,000 reports to our I've Got One hotline. So the top 4 species reported to our hotline during that time was green iguanas, top of the list with 17% of the reports, followed by the Peter's rockagama at 11% of the reports, and then Argentine black and white tegus and Burmese pythons each at 7%. So notice that 3 of the top 4 species reported to our hotline are regulated as prohibited species. So your green iguanas, tegu, and Burmese python. We also utilize multiple control and management projects that focus on targeting removal of established high priority species. So for example, our Patrick program, the Python Action Team, removing invasive constrictors, utilizes contractors who are paid hourly to conduct python surveys, and they're also paid additionally for any pythons or python nests that they can remove. Additionally, we provide financial research support to some of our partners developing innovative control methods for non-native species in Florida. We also have an awesome education and outreach team that conducts education programs both in person and virtually, including going to schools for outreach, hosting workshops, and doing tabling events. We also utilize our exotic pet amnesty program, or EPAP for short, in an effort to reduce the number of non-native species released into the wild from the pet trade through offering amnesty for various rehoming scenarios. And then finally, our agency has constitutional authority to create rules and regulations that help us manage our fish and wildlife in Florida. So we'll be taking a deeper look at an example of this approach through our 2025 rule changes for prohibited reptiles. All right, so this is our non-native fish and wildlife regulatory classification slide. So really quick here, we've got conditional species on the left, and then you've got prohibited species on the right, and then you have a list of just general activities. So we have various sets of regulatory classifications that were really implemented based on the impacts that an animal might have. So the ones that our program deals with the most are conditional species and prohibited species. So I want to emphasize that this is not a comprehensive regulatory list. There are other regulatory classes such as class 1, class 2, class 3, venomous reptiles that generally our captive wildlife team handles. But as you can see, neither of these species listed as conditional or prohibited are allowed as pets, although I'll say that there are exceptions like the personal pet permits for green iguanas or tegus or permitted red-eared sliders. But all species in these categories do require some sort of permit. So an example of a conditional species is that nutria on the left there, and then we've got our yellow anaconda, that prohibited species on the right. So this is just another aspect of our agency that encourages responsible pet ownership, animal exhibition, and commercial sale. It's also a helpful tool that gives us a better chance of hitting that prevention stage on the invasion curve. So it's really our first line of defense and one of the most cost-effective management techniques. All right, so now I will jump into initiating the rulemaking process. So initiating the rulemaking process can come from various sources. So it can come directly from our FWC commissioners. We can receive requests from other FWC staff members, external parties to the FWC. So this can be informally requested or formally petitioned. And really the first step of our non-native fish and wildlife program staff is to dig into the data that we have available and see if it supports the need for rulemaking. So now where did the request for rulemaking of the 2025 rule changes for prohibited reptiles come from? And really, what was the purpose behind these rule changes? So our staff received some feedback from wildlife trappers, captive wildlife industry members, and some other stakeholders for FWC to really consider ways to expand the allowance of folks who could be authorized to sell wild harvested green iguanas out of state, and to also look at adjusting or potentially adding alternative options for outdoor caging of green iguanas. So the two 2025 rule change packages sought to address the feedback that was received by staff from our stakeholders. So to begin the rulemaking process, we start by brainstorming initial proposed rule change concepts. So one of my personal favorite parts about the rulemaking process is the opportunity to collaborate with our FWC captive wildlife team. So in the initial phase of the rulemaking process for outdoor caging and biosecurity of green iguanas, our captive wildlife staff and non-native fish and wildlife program staff met in Ocala on May 27th of 2025 to begin brainstorming alternative outdoor caging options for green iguanas. So we spent a ton of time discussing alternative caging materials, the allowance of dig barriers, and we began the development of collection and transport rules that would be specifically in place for wild harvested green iguanas. So during the collaboration process, this is when we can really refine those initial concepts, discuss any issues, oftentimes there are, and ultimately bring a more polished proposal of draft concepts to the non-native fish and wildlife technical assistance group. So we work very closely with our non-native fish and wildlife technical assistance group throughout the rulemaking process. So we hold both virtual and in-person meetings. And our agency works with a lot of various tags, but the purpose of our non-native fish and wildlife tag is to enhance and promote ongoing dialogue among organizations, agencies, stakeholders, and really working together to examine the regulatory structure of non-native fish and wildlife in Florida. The tag can provide opportunities for FWC staff to solicit feedback from tag members on proposed concepts prior to going to the commission with proposed rule or final rule. Now, that being said, the tag is not an advisory committee, nor are they delegated any decision-making authority. So we also solicit feedback for proposed rule change concepts through a series of virtual public meetings. We also launched an online commenting form, and we also collect comments through email submissions as well. And all of these components together really allow us to establish the best possible outcome for draft rule prior to going to the commission to present proposed rule or final rule. And draft rule is not finalized until it receives approval from our FWC commissioners. All right, so now I'll jump into our 2025 rule changes for prohibited reptiles. So what were the goals of the 2025 rule changes for prohibited reptiles? So as I touched on briefly at the beginning of the presentation, FWC staff received some feedback from wildlife trappers, captive wildlife industry members, and some other stakeholders requesting to consider ways to allow more people to remove green iguanas from the wild in Florida to be sold out of state. So we really wanted to activate more Floridians to harvest and sell wild invasive green iguanas out of state. And some of the feedback included that the qualifications to be authorized to sell green iguanas were far too restrictive, and there was little incentive for Floridians to be removing green iguanas from the wild. So to support this request, we sought to expand the number of permittees who would be authorized to sell live wild harvested green iguanas out of state, and also establish an allowance for permittees to transfer live wild harvested green iguanas to sales permittees so they can be sold out of state, along with some other additional changes to regulations for non-native species. Then additionally, stakeholders provided feedback that the established outdoor caging requirements are very cumbersome. So FWC staff sought to provide practical and secure alternatives to the concrete wall requirements for outdoor caging of green iguanas. And then we also included some other updates for non-native fish and wildlife regulations. So this included emergency preparedness plans for prohibited reptiles, FWC law enforcement placement options for prohibited species, and then streamlining the prohibited species pet permit application. Frozen here. There we go. All right, so I'll start with our first rule package. Just a reminder, these rules went into effect August 20th of 2025. So collection and sales of green iguanas and other non-native species regulations. So before I jump into the rule changes, I'd just like to provide some information on our stakeholder feedback. So staff drafted those initial concepts to achieve the goals that I touched on in the previous slide and shared those ideas with our non-native fish and wildlife technical assistance group in December of 2024. And we solicited feedback from our TAG members. So staff refined the initial rule change concepts discussed with the TAG, and we presented revised versions of these concepts to the public during our six virtual public meetings. So this was a fairly large rule package. So we actually split the virtual public meetings up so that we had 3 virtual meetings focusing on collection and sales of green iguanas. And then we had 3 virtual meetings focused on other regulatory changes for non-native species. So we ended up having 107 total attendees for the virtual public meeting series. Then additionally, we launched a online commenting form, and then we collected comments through email. Then we received 68 total comments. So some of the feedback we received included concern over the caging, pit tags, and the limited number of people able to sell green iguanas. And then others were concerned about accountability in commercializing green iguanas. Some other comments range from fully supportive to supportive on some components. So FWC staff presented final rule to FWC commissioners at the May 2025 commission meeting that was held in Ocala, Florida. Then the rule change went into effect August 20th of 2025 following FWC commissioner approval. All right, so green iguana sales. So we have removed the ESC license requirement. So this is your captive wildlife class 3 exhibition or sales license. And we also removed the inventory requirement, to which stated that you needed to have green iguanas on your 2018 or 2019 license applications or had indicated planned possession. So formally, you needed to check these boxes to qualify for authorization to sell green iguanas. So we've removed those requirements for green iguana sales. So now, anyone can apply for authorization to sell live wild harvested green iguanas in Florida out of state. We did not change any of the qualifications for authorization to sell tegus. So you still need to have that ESC requirement and inventory requirements for tegus. That has not changed. When the rule change occurred back in 2021, you had a 90-day window to apply for this particular sales permit, the commercial sales permit. And we've removed this grace period. So now you can go ahead and apply at any time. So anyone can go ahead and apply for this commercial sales permit at any time. You just will need to, you just would be required to meet the caging and biosecurity requirements for green iguanas. And then we also created the allowance of transferring the sales permit to a spouse, a beneficiary, or a new business owner. So really what this was we got some feedback from some of our stakeholders of just adding an additional option to really just keep that pipeline of green iguanas being sold out of state. And then we also removed the pit tag requirement for green iguanas that are less than 5-inch snout to vent length, or for green iguanas that are possessed for less than 30 days. Now, this is only for our eradication and control and sales permittees. So again, some of the feedback we received from some of our stakeholders was that pit tagging these smaller body green iguanas, so that smaller class size is a little bit cost prohibitive. So we wanted to check that box. And then we also wanted to incentivize folks getting those green iguanas sold out of state as quickly as possible. So if you can get those green iguanas sold out of state within that 30-day window, you don't have to pit tag those green iguanas. But as soon as you hit that 31-day mark, you would have to add a pit tag to your green iguanas. So transfer endorsement. So before I jump into this rule change, I would like to provide just some quick background on the eradication and control permit. So non-native reptiles, they can be humanely killed on private lands at any time with landowner permission, and there's no permit required. So non-native reptiles may also be humanely killed at any time throughout the year from 32 wildlife management areas, public small game hunting areas, and wildlife and environmental areas that's covered in Executive Order or EO 2316. Now, for people or businesses who are removing prohibited species for eradication and control purposes, they can apply for the eradication and control permit. And really what this does is just allow for a very temporary live transport. So under this permit, all animals removed using this permit must be humanely killed within 24 hours unless you have authorization for commercial sale. So that's just your baseline eradication and control permit. So you get that very temporary live transport, but those animals do need to be humanely killed within 24 hours. Now, what we've done is we've added the transfer endorsement to the eradication and control permit. And what this does is it allows those eradication and control permittees who select this transfer endorsement authorization to transfer those live wilds harvested green iguanas to a sales permittee so that they can be sold out of state. And those folks with the transfer endorsement, they could potentially be paid by those sales permittee for that transfer so that they can sell those out of state. Now, to get this transfer endorsement, you must be compliant with caging and biosecurity before you're issued the permit with the transfer endorsement. We also included some other regulatory changes to non-native species in this rule package. These are generally not directly related to collection and sales of green iguanas, but they were still important changes to be made. And while we were doing the rulemaking, we wanted to ensure that we had a chance to include these. So we did some updates for prohibited species personal use permits. So first major change here, we removed the annual permit renewal requirement for this personal use permit. So formerly you had to do an annual permit renewal. You no longer have to do that. All you would have to do is let us know within 90 days if your animal, if your pet passes away, or if you move addresses. You just have to let us know within 90 days, but you don't have to go through any sort of annual renewal process. Now, another big change here is for folks who are moving to Florida from out of state, they can apply for this personal use permit for their pet tegu or green iguana, and they can get this permit as long as they can provide proof that they had possession of their pet tegu or pet green iguana prior to its listing as prohibited in the state of Florida. Though we also received some feedback from one of our permittees requesting us to think about how we could potentially allow for an exhibition animal who maybe is getting too old to be an exhibition animal to be retired to a personal use permit. So We're allowing authorization for an exhibition animal, must be a green iguana or a tegu, to be retired and transferred to a personal use permit. So this is a one-time only transfer for that animal. So you can't transfer it back and forth between permits. Once it's transferred to that personal use permit, it has to stay there for the remainder of its life. So some other changes here. So green iguanas or tegus under 9 inches snout to vent length can now be housed in the same enclosure. And then we also established FWC law enforcement placement options for prohibited species. So for facilities with authorization to exhibit prohibited species at a residential property are allowed to acquire additional prohibited species through FWC action and permit amendment. So this can be a temporary or permanent placement of prohibited species at these permitted exhibition facilities that are operating at residential properties. The permittee just must maintain a copy of the temporary acquisition paperwork. They have to be compliant with the caging. And then those permittees may also request an amendment to their existing permit if that animal does become available and the permittee wants to keep it. We also defined the term transshipment. So I'm just going to read off this slide here for this definition. So refers to a shipment of wildlife that stops temporarily at an intermediate destination prior to arriving at its final destination. The temporary holding facility during transshipment must be a bonded facility, port or airport that is a secure storage location under customs supervision where businesses can store imported or exported shipments without having to clear customs. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears to our other rule changes that looked at green iguana, outdoor caging, and biosecurity. So just as I've done with the collection and sales for green iguanas and some other changes for non-native species, I'd just like to provide some information on the feedback that we received from our stakeholders. So again, staff drafted initial concepts to achieve the goals that I touched on in the previous goal slide and shared these ideas with our non-native fish and wildlife technical assistance group in July of 2025. And solicited feedback from our tag members. So we reviewed multiple alternatives for outdoor caging materials for green iguanas and had several presentations from FWC staff and tag members outlining some of these ideas. And staff refined the initial rule change concepts that were discussed with the tag, and we presented those refined versions of these concepts to the public during 3 virtual public meetings. So we had a total of 62 participants in the virtual public meeting series. Then additionally, we launched a commenting forum and collected comments through email, and we received 28 total comments. And some of the feedback we received included concern over restriction of material requirements and concern over commercializing green iguanas. Then other comments ranged from fully supportive to supportive on some components. So FWC staff presented final rule to commissioners at the November 2025 commission meeting held in Belglade, Florida. And then the rule change went into effect January 7th of 2026 following FWC commissioner approval. Okay, so the next 2 slides here are just some photos of green iguanas. So I really want us all to take a close look at this hatchling green iguana here. So these are 2 photos of hatchling green iguanas. And this is sort of the class size that our stakeholders said would be targeted for a lot of these commercial sales options. So we wanted to ensure that we are thinking through alternative caging options that would be sufficient for an animal this size. So just, noticing the size of its head compared to the your thumb there. So we're talking about a pretty small animal. And then really on the flip side, you've got an adult green iguana here who is able to, wiggle its way through your standard chain link fencing. So just keeping these photos in mind as I'm talking through some of these alternative outdoor caging options. All right, so outdoor enclosure and caging. So this photo was taken from our FWC staff. So what this is this is a photo of the formally established outdoor caging construction for green iguanas. So you've got your 4-foot concrete walls that are 8 inches in thickness. You've got your concrete floors that are at least 2 inches in thickness. They've got a double door safety entrance, and then it's topped with mesh. So just a reminder, we received a lot of feedback about how cumbersome these caging requirements were. So the main goal here was to address some practical and secure alternatives to the concrete requirements for outdoor caging of green iguanas. So green iguanas, they can be housed indoors in a room or outbuilding or in an outdoor enclosure. So no change there. Now that formally established outdoor caging for green iguanas construction that you just saw in that previous slide, that's still in rule. You can still build your outdoor enclosure that way. Folks who have already built their enclosure that way, they can still continue to use that outdoor enclosure. All we've done is added an alternative option for construction for outdoor caging of green iguanas. So these alternatives will apply to all permittees in legal possession of green iguanas, not just the sales permittees. So the alternatives, so that your floor, your side, and the top of the enclosure could also be constructed of a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch metal closed mesh wire. Your floor could also be constructed with a concrete or masonry block that is 1.5 inches in thickness. Getting a frozen mouse here. Let's see. Okay. The third option is for your flooring, you could do a natural floor with dig barriers that are dug at least 2 feet in depth. So say you did your natural floor with dig barriers. The natural floor, you could do just grass, you could do soil, mulch, whatever you want to do. And then you'd have those dig barriers that are dug at least 2 feet in depth. And that depth must be verifiable during inspection. So if you do this natural floor with the dig barriers, you wouldn't need to have any additional flooring. So you wouldn't need to have any concrete flooring material or any of the 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch metal closed mesh wire. You could just do the natural floor, the dig barriers dug 2 feet deep, and you're good to go for the flooring. And the materials for enclosure would need to be securely attached to all connecting walls using a frame to provide structural integrity and prevent escape. So there's no specific material requirement for the frame. Just as long as it provides structural integrity and prevents escape, you're good to go. And then any connecting materials, they must be made of metal. Now, your outdoor enclosure needs to have drainage, and that construction must prevent escape. So whether you put that 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch metal closed mesh on top of that drainage system, or however you want to do it to prevent escape, you just have to make sure you have drainage and it prevents this. It's constructed so it prevents escape. And then here's some quick material photos here. So on the left, you've got your 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch closed mesh wire, and then you've got a photo of that 1.5 inch concrete paver. And then this is a photo of a dig barrier. So it's not the best photo. I'm not entirely sure if that's actually a 2 feet in depth. It's just an example here of just what this might look like. So really the dig barrier is just an extension of your wall material, right? So you've got your frame here, and then you've got that mesh wire wall, and that is just an extended, and it's dug into the ground. So in our case, you need to have that extended at least 2 feet into the ground. Okay, so double door safety entrance. So this is a great photo of a double door safety entrance. It's not a great photo of how to properly use a double door safety entrance. So it's really simple. It's simple concept. So when you open this external door, you have to close it behind you before you can open that interior door. So we got a lot of feedback from some of our stakeholders that said that they like the double door safety entrance, especially for biosecurity. So that has stayed in rules, so you can continue to use that double door safety entrance. But in lieu of a double door safety entrance, you could also use a primary enclosure housed within a larger secondary enclosure. So what this is essentially a cage inside of a cage. So your secondary enclosure, that larger exterior caging, it must be constructed as I previously described. So either the formally established outdoor caging for green iguanas using the concrete walls, or those alternative options. So using a frame, using a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch metal closed mesh for your walls, your top, and your floor. As long as you have that, that's how you would need to construct it. And then the primary enclosure, really the only construction requirement would be you need to use that 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch metal closed mesh wire. And then, so similarly with double door safety entrance, the entrance must be fully closed before the door of the enclosure is open. So you've got your secondary enclosure, that exterior caging. You open that door, you have to close it behind you before you go to that primary enclosure and open the caging entrance. And then just another quick statement here. So primary enclosure and secondary containment must both meet regulatory requirements and prevent escape of green iguanas. So exhibition facilities and research permittees. So I just want to reiterate again. So iguanas, they can be kept indoors in a room or outbuilding or in an outdoor enclosure. So no change there. And as I stated previously, so that all of these alternative outdoor caging options apply to all permittees in legal possession of green iguanas. So including our exhibition and research permittees. But additionally, for our exhibition and research folks who are in long-term or permanent possession of green iguanas that are larger than 9-inch snout to vent length, they can keep those green iguanas in caging using a 1-inch by 3-inch metal closed mesh wire. So one of our small exhibitor tag members mentions that a lot of times they have larger green iguanas on exhibit, and generally that 1/4-inch by 1/4-inch metal closed mesh may make it challenging for guests to view the larger iguanas on exhibit. So for our exhibition and research permittees, if you do have those larger bodied green iguanas that are larger than 9-inch snout to vent length, they can be kept in that 1-inch by 3-inch metal closed mesh wire. And then there was also no change to the viewing panel provisions that is currently established in rule. So this was another feedback that we got from our small exhibitor tag member, who said that they love using the viewing panel. So we did not change anything with those viewing panels. So that's still established in rule. So prohibited materials. So we have a current list that's already outlined in our chapter 68.5. And so we're going to maintain that current list, but we've also added diamond mesh lath to the prohibited materials list. So this was a material that we found very early on that is sort of flimsy. I think it's supposed to be used with concrete, laying concrete, and it's very sharp, so it could potentially be injurious to green iguanas. So we've added that material to the prohibited materials list. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. So transport and collection of prohibited reptiles. So I'm going to touch on just this quick rule cleanup for all prohibited reptiles, and then I'll touch on our transport and collection of wild harvested green iguanas. So that's a brand new rule. But for transport and collection of all prohibited reptiles, this was just a quick rule clarification. So previously in rule, it stated that for prohibited reptiles, they have to be placed in a bag, placed in a double bag of similar construction, and then those bags need to be placed in a closed locked container labeled prohibited reptiles. So in rule, it didn't say that you needed to tie these bags. So all we did was a quick rule cleanup clarifying that all cloth sacks must be tied or sealed shut. And again, this applies to all prohibited reptiles. So transport and collection of wild harvested green iguanas. So as I mentioned previously, this is a brand new established rule. So for collection, so wild harvested green iguanas must be maintained in collection containers or bags during field collection. Collection containers and bags must be secure and escape proof. So I just want to reiterate, this is brand new. So while you're going out, so say you're permitted, you're authorized to remove wild harvested green iguanas. Say you're collecting on a line of vegetation, instead of having to go back to your truck or your vehicle to put these green iguanas in your transport bin, lock it, and it's labeled prohibited reptiles, you can actually continue to collect and maintain those captured green iguanas in your collection containers or bags. So those two photos, great example of potential collection containers that you could use. You've got a mesh bag on the bottom, and then you've got that tub, so you could use a bucket, a trap. As long as those collection containers are secure and prevent escape, you can maintain those green iguanas throughout the collection activities. And that's just to help with efficiency. And wild harvested green iguanas of varying sizes, they can be kept in the same collection container or bag. So you don't need to separate based on size during collection activities. Now for transport. So let's say you're done collecting, maybe you're going back to your permitted facility, or maybe you're just switching collection sites. So for transport, those collection containers or bags that are holding the wild harvested green iguanas that you removed, they must be transferred to a secure locked bin when the collector arrives back to their vehicle, vessel, or motorized device. So transport can only occur after iguanas are secured in the locked containers labeled prohibited reptiles. Collection containers and bags cannot be reopened after transport has begun. They must remain closed until arrival at permitted facilities. So just for some clarification here. So you've got your collection bag on the left here. It's placed in your transport bin. You close that lid, you lock it up. It's labeled prohibited reptile. You're ready for transport. So say you're just moving collection, spots. So you're ready to go. You start your transport. You make it to your next collection spot. What you can do is you can grab a new collection container or bag that doesn't have any green iguanas captured in it. And you can start adding new green iguanas at your new capture site. And you can put that collection bag or container in that transport bin. So you can open that lid, add additional collection containers or bags. What you can't do is you can't take that already closed collection container or bag out of the transport bin and add additional green iguanas to it. Once you close that bag or that container, it's sealed. It has to remain closed until you arrive back at your permitted facility. But you can open that transport bin to add additional collection containers or bags as you continue your collection throughout the night. We also define the term locked. So locked is defined as fastened or secured by a device operated by a key, combination lock, key card, or other locking device. And then emergency preparedness plan. So just another quick rule clarification, clarifying that cloth sacks must be closed or sealed shut. And then for permittees in legal possession, once those prohibited reptiles are bagged, there's really sort of two options here. They can be moved indoors or they can be moved temporarily out of the path of the storm in a secure and safe location that prevents escape. Now, for eradication and sales permittees who are in possession of wild harvested green iguanas, they can humanely kill these animals at any time. This is completely optional. It's just in an emergency situation, that is an option that they can do. And then permittees must report their plans and status to local captive wildlife investigators prior to the onset of critical conditions. So no change there. And I'll wrap up with some next steps with stakeholder engagement for the Non-Native Fish and Wildlife Program. So our Non-Native Fish and Wildlife Program will continue to meet with our Non-Native Fish and Wildlife Technical Assistance Group. We plan to pick up where we left off with discussing risk determination. And then we also hope to come to a future commission meeting with risk determination language, creating a transparent and standardized process for evaluating risk of non-native species and informed management decisions. We've also established a herpetofauna working group. So this is to improve working relationship between FWC staff and industry stakeholders. And we're going to be discussing issues in relation to native and non-native reptiles and amphibians and identifying collaborative solutions. So thank you. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. This was a lot of really good information. I'm glad we got these updates from you. And because there was so much information, I wanted to ask, is there a convenient spot for folks who want to go back and reference this material that we can direct folks?
Yeah, so I can pop in the chat. We have all of our rule pages. So all of those rule changes will be outlined, and there's some other really helpful sort of pages in there. So let me pop that in this, and I'm actually gonna stop sharing
Yeah,
here.
you can stop. Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah, let me pop this in the chat.